Good afternoon. Thank you. Someone once said, "Speak up, because the day you don't speak up for the things that matter to you is the day your freedom truly ends." And that the world suffers not because of the violence of bad people, but because of the silence of good people. Today I want to speak up about an issue happening on our streets and behind closed doors. I'm here to start a conversation about human trafficking. My name is Jonathan Lee-Coley. My purpose in life is simple: avoid spiders, eat lasagna, and abolish modern slavery. Today, I am a human trafficking researcher, speaker, anti-trafficking consultant, and freedom advocate. But if you Googled me 10 years ago, you would have found this, or this, or these, and my particular favorite, this one. I thought having white hair would make me different and I would stand out. Turns out, it made me different and I stood out. For most of my life, I was a child actor. I started when I was 8 years old, and besides the 5 a.m. call times, I really enjoyed what I did. What most people don't know is that despite where I was in the world, I always had a heart for people. At age 11, I founded my first nonprofit called Jazz's Friends Foundations with my parents. And that allowed me to travel across America to perform for underprivileged and hospital-bound children. I loved it. I loved all of it. I worked in the arts for almost 16 years. Little did anyone know that I would give it up, including my acceptance to a known art school, to major in what? Yes, political science. I made that decision, the biggest decision of my life so far, 2 weeks before the fall term began. All because of a woman named Amy. It was her who made me aware of human trafficking. Amy was a UN ambassador who I met in LA. She represented an anti-trafficking organization called Girl Up. I'll never forget the day I learned that human trafficking was a real issue that happened to children my age and younger. Again, I was only 15 at the time, but something in me broke. This is the reason why I'm having this conversation today, to propose a question we each must ask ourselves. When it comes to our community, what's the conversation? What education, topics, news, and information are we as a community sharing with each other? More importantly, what is missing from our conversations and how can we change that? I humbly stand before you today to ask that you include human trafficking in your community's conversations. The longer human trafficking stays missing from our conversations, the longer little boys and girls lost to sex slavery and forced labor will stay missing from their families. Because what we miss in our conversations, we will certainly miss in life. Today I'm going to teach you how to spread awareness to anyone, anywhere, at any time. Here's some points you can use to start the conversation. The best way to bring up human trafficking is first by knowing what it is. Generally, human trafficking is the recruitment of vulnerable women, children, and men through the act of exploitation, for the act of exploitation through the means of force, fraud, and coercion. There are 3 major forms of human trafficking: labor trafficking, sex trafficking, and state-imposed labor of convicts in industrial prisons. It happens everywhere. It's not only the second largest criminal industry right behind the drug trade, but it is the fastest growing business globally. Worldwide, human trafficking is a $150 billion criminal industry. There are an estimated 20 to 40.3 million victims of trafficking globally. 70% of human trafficking is forced labor. 71% of human trafficking victims are women and girls. They are also the majority of sex trafficking victims. In the United States, traffickers are making an estimated $32 billion a year off the labor and bodies of people. These are the statistics, but do not get lost in the numbers. I mention these because some of us, including myself, are numbers people. We like to get the bigger picture. If you're looking to start a conversation with a big thinker, share with them a few statistics to get them thinking. If you're trying to start a conversation with a parent, inform them that our children are at risk through their use of the internet and social media. Let them know youth are most vulnerable due to an increasing demand of child sex trafficking and child pornography. 70% of child victims at some point are sold online. And even worse, the average age of a child sold into slavery is 10 years old. If you're trying to start this conversation with young people, share with them who is at risk. You can emphasize how risks increase for children of color and LGBTQ youth, runaways, and children ejected from the system. Parents with teenagers should definitely know that within 48 hours of leaving home, 1 in 3 child runaways are forced into commercial sexual exploitation. Or how our homeless youth are particularly vulnerable because, well, studies have shown 1 in 5 homeless youth have been trafficked at some point. Now, we won't all connect to everything, and that's fine. But do yourself a favor by starting a conversation with others who can connect and engage with you. My point is, human trafficking, bringing it up can be easier for yourself if you know what kind of person you're talking to. And I really hope I can encourage you to share, especially within our non-metropolitan communities. If we wait any longer to start having conversations about who is at risk in local communities, we'll constantly lose more children than we save. Let's use Atlanta as an example. Due to a misinterpretation of an FBI report in 2006, Atlanta has been mislabeled as the city with the most human trafficking. We are not number 1. However, I've been doing research about human trafficking in non-metropolitan communities for over 6 years now, so I can say with confidence that we will become number 1. Atlanta is known to be a hub of human trafficking, but I must clarify what's really happening. While the business of selling people is happening in Atlanta, their supply of girls and women are coming from suburban neighborhoods. In an interview, a trafficker admitted to law enforcement that they intentionally targeted children in isolated communities because their success in recruiting a victim solely depended on whether or not the victim knew about human trafficking. What this means is small local communities are hunting grounds for traffickers. And our lack of community awareness and education on this topic only makes their job easier. In the fight to protect our children and ourselves from modern slavery, education is our first line of defense. We must disrupt the supply of vulnerable children coerced into sex slavery by first acknowledging human trafficking as a community. Because it's happening here. Let's take April's case, for example. In 2006, April was just 19 years old when she left home to make a life of her own. She didn't live in Atlanta. She wasn't an immigrant or anything we imagine when we think of victims of human trafficking. April was one of us, born and raised right here in McDonough. Due to her limited income, April rented a room from a woman who owned a townhouse, and she later began to struggle to make rent each month and became fearful of not living up to her own expectations. One day, a man named Slim knocked on her door with a job offer. You see, her roommate had shared her financial problems with their neighbor, and he was there to offer her a job at his friend's bar. He told her that she was beautiful, and because she didn't have a car, he even offered to drive her to 30 minutes to and from Atlanta. This was the blessing April was hoping for, but what happened next was nothing she'd ever expect. The first night was slow. Slim drove her to her new job at a bar called El Toro. She was instructed to serve drinks, talk to regulars, and even have a drink with a customer if they bought her one. April didn't drink, but she didn't think it would be that big of a deal. On the second day, the bar was packed full of men. She met an owner, and she met another girl who was working behind the bar who was only 16 years old. Before pouring her a beer, the owner introduced her to several regulars. After just a few sips of her beer, April began to feel woozy. And when she tried to go to the restroom, it was blocked by a wall of drunken men. The owner helped April to a room behind the bar. By this point, April was slipping in and out of consciousness. Shortly after, the owner returned with 2 men, and she watched them give the owner money. And that night, April was raped by at least 2 men. She didn't wake up till the next day, and when she finally found her way back to McDonough, Slim was waiting at the townhouse to take her back to the bar. When she told him what had happened to her there, he told her that he owned her, and that he would kill her family and her if she tried to get help. April went back to work that day, and while she worked, she watched men place bids on her. Fortunately, one day she was able to escape back to McDonough, but April never went back to save that 16-year-old girl. I want to alert you that human trafficking is closer to home than we think. We must start having this conversation because it is not an Atlanta problem, it's our problem. We must stop waiting until after our daughters have been raped to talk about consent. We must not wait until after our children are kidnapped to hold them closer. We can no longer afford to wait until victims escape their bondage to rescue them. There are children beyond these walls right now, as young as 10 years old, trapped because they were not educated on how to spot the signs of human trafficking. Here's what our community should know. See something, say something, demand something. The first one, see something. Keep an eye out for marginalized and vulnerable groups in your communities. The second is take 12 seconds to remember the National Human Trafficking Hotline. This is our best resource to reporting cases of trafficking and possibly saving a life. Lastly, demand something. Demand your elected officials keep this conversation going. Demand your city adopt anti-trafficking initiatives, programs, and policies to their agenda. We need to demand that our law enforcement are educated on how to spot signs of traffickers, child predators, and offenders in our local communities. We need to demand our public safety officers are training our youth on how to spot signs as well. Lastly, demand more credible research from our academic institutions. We need good research. There's still a lot of gaps in data that we need to explore, and there's definitely policy that needs to be nationally addressed to make sure that anti-trafficking protections are offered to all victims across 50 states. Martin Luther King once said, "The time is always right to do what is right." To protect our children, they must be educated enough to spot signs of trafficking. What are the red flags? Where traffickers hunt for victims, who is at risk, and how they will be engaged. It is my hope that this information exists in every community. I try to start conversations like this to build anti-trafficking awareness and prevention, to teach our community and our youth how to be aware of their vulnerabilities and their life constraints. In life, everyone has a purpose. I know this is mine. Thank you.